for those who wish to participate. Okay, so I started this session by sharing the calendar of this series. So as I said, we start today with Nicoletta Zappile from UPR Info, Geneva. UPR Info is a what's the name? The NGO. Gate. Okay. Now there is this name which is used to qualify NGOs that are sort of doorway and gatekeeper. In the sense that they sort of facilitate participation of any other kind of NGOs, including grassroots, small organizations, and so on, to get in touch to participate in the activities of the UN Geneva-based bodies dealing with human rights. So UPR Info is specialized on the UPR, of course, and is very active in promoting this exercise, this instrument, this tool for participating in the implementation of human rights worldwide. And she's an officer of this organization, and she has been collaborating with us for this project, but also with other projects since some years ago. The first contact were, I think, 4 or 5 years ago. Then there is a gap because we go to the 22nd of June with the second meeting with Katharina Freller, who is a former participant in this UPR model and is now working for the University of Graz. And the idea with her is to discuss about the UPR and also the model UPR as a research field, because I think that many students can participate in this exercise, also having in mind their thesis, the dissertation that they have to write at the end of their, let's say, master. And then we proceed with Jason McKeown, who is a member of an officer at the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission, and this is important both for the topic that he will deal with, namely communication and advertisement about human rights, so how to communicate in an effective way human rights issues and how to engage people in human rights, let's say, topics. But it is worthwhile to have this meeting with Jason, also because in the UPR, in the scheme of the UPR, the role of national institutions for human rights is particularly prominent, and we have the chance of having this connection with a very active national institution for human rights, the one based in Ulster. So I hope that this can also encourage students to be part of our simulation representing national institutions for human rights, which is one of the actors that we have in our simulation. And then we continue. So the last 4, I think, meetings are with our Lia Ria, who is one of our leader in the present incumbent secretariat. Okay, I don't know whether maybe Julia or any other member of the secretariat who are here now wish to say a few words, because we are, yes?
Yes, hello, I apologize for the lighting because it might be a bit dark. So yes, I can present the Secretariat's work so far, and if any of my mates has anything to add, I think they can probably write in the chat or well, write to me, and then I can voice their concerns or remarks. So I think that so far we've followed the kind of structure that was in place during the last years as well for the Secretariat. So we're divided into two teams, the comms team and the concept team, which are the main, let's say, clusters that we are utilizing to kind of structure our work. And personally, I am the co-leader of the concept team with Marianthi as well, although I think couldn't be here today, but so we are leaders of the concept team, and then we have a comms team as well who's taking care of all the social media work, the website, all of the promotional videos and the emails as well that are being sent out to NGOs or even NHRIs for the training sessions as well. So we're kind of working in advance so that we know that we're going to be ready in September and October when applications are going to start coming in, and when we, when the simulation is going to be upon us as well. And so far, as it can probably be seen from the website, the application is now live. It was launched a week ago, and we have selected the states under review for this year simulations, which are going to be Chile, Mauritius, Mexico, New Zealand, Saudi Arabia, and Slovakia. And with that, we've selected their respective NHRIs as well, which for Chile is el Instituto Nacional de Derechos Humanos, for Saudi Arabia, the National Society for Human Rights, for Mexico, la Comisión Nacional de los Derechos Humanos, for Mauritius, the National Human Rights Commission, for New Zealand, the TKUI, Tika Tangata Human Rights Commission, and for Slovakia, the Slovak National Center for Human Rights. And then we also focused a lot of our work on NGOs, and we selected 6 of them based on focus areas that we thought would be interesting in relation to the states and in general when it comes to the UPR future and kind of research going into like the first cycle and following cycles. And what we've selected is our ILGA World for LGBTQIA+ rights. Then we have the International Disability Alliance for disability rights, the World Resource Institute for environmental rights, the World Organization Against Torture for torture and CID treatment issues, ECTPAD International for children rights, and Equality Now for women's rights. We thought that they encompassed and kind of covered a variety of different human rights issues that are present today, and especially, again, linked to the countries. So that's basically the work that we've been doing. We've also been reviewing the handbook. We have a specific team that is under the concept team that has reviewed the handbook. We have a guidebook as well for this year with a presentation of the Secretariat. We also want to let participants know that there is a possibility after the simulation, after they've been selected for the simulation, after they undergo the simulations, participants to be Secretariat. And personally, for me, I can say it's been a very challenging but also enriching experience so far, because you can see everything from behind the scenes, and it's also good in terms of developing your management skills, for instance. And well, if you're part of the comms team, a whole nother set of skills that you can develop. So overall, this is the work that we've been doing so far. And we're looking into creating more promotional videos and content. As Professor De Stefani has mentioned, we're thinking of making some clips from these seminars so that they can be info sessions, so that people can watch them and kind of get to know what the Padova Model UPR is going to look like. And then, of course, if there are any questions or doubts, queries, etc., we're also available through our email. And yes, and with the Secretariat, we have different tasks relating to the emails as well. So we're trying to keep that schedule and scheme for our work.
To give the floor to Nicoletta, we ask her to let's say tell us something from her, let's say, special position, from her qualified viewpoint about this the news that are now concerning the UPR. We are entering the fourth cycle. The fourth cycle is going to be kind of different from the previous ones, apparently. But on which aspects, from which perspective is it bringing something new? This is what we asked Nicoletta to talk about. And then I hope that she will also be available for taking some questions and also for giving us some advice about what we have done, what we can do, and the decisions that we have taken concerning, for example, when Julia mentioned the states that we selected, the NGOs, etc. Maybe she may have some comments on that. Okay. Thank you, Nicoletta, for joining, and you have the floor. I think you can share your screen if you need.
Yes, thank you so much.
Please.
Thank you for the introduction and for the presentation of the Secretariat. I'll just a few minutes that I can put in presentation mode. Okay. So I'm very happy to be here because, as Professor Di Stefani said, I'm following the UPR model since now it's been 4 years, and I'm a big fan of this type of initiative. And I'd like to start by saying that actually all UPR Info team is a big fan of this initiative, and we try to always share this experience with other young groups of activists, with academics, when we have meetings and consultations, and we share the guidebook that has been drafted by the previous members of the Secretariat, because we really believe that the UPR model is a great opportunity for students not only to learn about how this mechanism works, how the UPR works, but also it's an opportunity to find out the human rights situation of some countries that maybe you are not, let's say, in your plan of study, and to develop skills such as how to develop a advocacy statement, or let's say, negotiate with your peer colleagues during the consultation. So that said, I hope I will try to manage to reply to this question, how civil society is contributing in the UPR, especially in the fourth cycle, and what are the trends and, let's say, characteristics of this fourth cycle. I'd like to start with something that we reiterate continuously, is that the UPR is a process. It's about a process that is ongoing. And there is always an entry point for civil society throughout this process. So you will be especially focusing on the preparation phase to the UPR, by preparing reports, doing research, and building the different statements and documents to then attend the simulation at the end of November. And that brings me to the second phase, which includes the review itself, and then the adoption of the state on the review. That means the decision on which recommendations to support and which recommendations to note. But I'd like just to focus a bit on the implementation phase, because this is actually, let's say, the focus that the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights has put in the guidelines and directions for the fourth cycle. As Professor Di Stefani said, we started this fourth cycle very recently in November 2022. This means that all the states, all the UN member states have been reviewed 3 times. And now we are starting all over again the assessment of the human rights situation in the UN member states. Why has the UACHR focusing on the implementation, which was already the main focus in the third cycle, but it's important to continue and insist in the implementation, because we need that the UPR brings concrete impact on the human rights situation on the ground. The UPR has been doing quite a good job, and this is thanks to the engagement of different actors, different stakeholders in this process. As you know, the nature of the UPR allows a different type of actors to engage. So it's not entirely correct to define the UPR a state-driven process. Why? Because we have so much that civil society can bring to the table that we are shifting as well in defining this process as a multi-stakeholder process. Without, of course, without creating confusion, but during the interactive dialogue of the UPR, it's only states that can take the floor. But all the work that is done in preparation of that interactive dialogue during the working group and the work that needs to be done after for implementing those recommendations, that is really a shared effort that the state and the other actors at the national level conduct. And I would like to share with you afterwards a few examples to show how UPR recommendations have led to actual change on the ground. And we will see that this change has been the result of a cooperative spirit in putting in place recommendations. How can civil society engage in the UPR? I will not do a lot of theory. Let's say I will try to speak more by providing you concrete examples that we have collected in the third cycle of the UPR and that we hope can be further on developed during the fourth cycle of the UPR process. One of the things that we have seen more and more often is the organization of national consultations that take place before the review. These national consultations in the third cycle have been in some cases launched by the government, so the state on the review, but in many cases when there was not, let's say, an explicit type of, or let's say when the state was not able to organize consultations, civil society or national human rights institutions have launched this consultation process, which is extremely important because it's the moment in which the human rights priorities of a country are defined to be then developed in the UPR discourse. And this means in the reports, in the advocacy efforts, and then if these efforts work, these priorities will be brought up during the working group. And we have assisted to consultations, and I'd like to share with you the examples by the National Human Rights Institution of in UK that has organized several, for example, events with young people, also adolescents going from the age of 16, 15 up to 25 also years old. And during these meetings, the National Human Rights Institutions was collecting the concerns of the young people, specifically in Scotland. And that's interesting because this is one of the trends that we see in the UPR, that is the engagement of young people, of youth-led organizations. And this is extremely important because through the participation of young people, we will see that the human rights thematics that are linked to young people will be more and more addressed in the UPR venue. So this is a good practice that started in the third cycle and is being used more and more also at the beginning of the fourth cycle. We had, for example, the experience of Morocco that did a similar thing, organizing activity with in cooperation with the UN agencies in Morocco and UPR Info, and we provided not only trainings on how to engage in the UPR, but also assisted on what were the priorities for the young Moroccans to bring in the UPR. And this leads me to another point that you will definitely address in your experience with the UPR model, that is to submit a report. The Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights for the fourth cycle has not only reiterated the, let's say, guidelines given previously in the third cycle that are to focus on implementation, so on the assessment of the implementation of UPR recommendations, but even more stressed the importance from civil society to provide first-hand information, so data, statistics, let's say the outcomes of consultations that came from the direct engagement of the NGOs from the civil society on the ground. In this, as you know, it's extremely important in order to for civil society to provide complementary information to the one that is submitted in the national reports and, of course, in the UN compilation reports. But the second very strong point that the OICHR has stressed in the guidelines for the fourth cycle for the submission of reports is to explicitly mention the perceived level of implementation of UPR recommendations. So it's suggested for two civil society organizations to mention whether, according to the information and data they collect, if the previous commitments of the state have been fully, partially, or not implemented. And that is important because through this type of assessment, we can then monitor how the situation in a country is evolving or, in worst cases, is deteriorating. So this is also an advice when you will be you will need to write these reports for the UPR model to focus on information that you collect as playing the role of civil society, and to present your level of assessment of the previous recommendations received by the state for which in which you are representing or which you are working. And of course, to support this assessment with an analysis. So that is extremely important. Another very important element of submitting a report, which is one of the, let's say, entry points for civil society organizations to participate in the UPR, is to include in these reports specific and action-oriented recommendations. For those who maybe of the Secretariat that were there last year, they might recall that UPR Info always encourages civil society to, let's say, follow the SMART methodology when drafting UPR recommendations. It's just 5 criteria that you can use to formulate these recommendations, and it's an acronym which stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. Note that it's not a math formula that you have to apply for all 5 criteria for each recommendation, but if you consider these criteria, it will be easier to formulate specific recommendations. And these are important because by having specific recommendations, civil society organizations can suggest the measures that the state is required to take in order to improve the human rights situation. And secondly, they are also important for that monitoring work that will help us then in the next cycle to see whether there has been any progress or not. When I was thinking to the new trends and I was hearing Giulia's selection for the NGOs that will participate in the simulation. And I must say that you did a very good job in selecting some of the thematics that are actually increasingly addressed in the UPR, and that will probably we will see more and more recommendations on these topics. One, as I said at the beginning of the topics, it's all those rights that are linked to the youth rights. So, for example, participation in decision-making of young people, or access to technologies or internet for large youth population. And I have just to give some examples of recommendations identified these two. But there has been, during the third cycle, especially towards the end of the third cycle, great attention to sexual and reproductive health rights, as well as all digital rights, sphere of the digital rights, and something that we have seen through the activities that UPR organize. And one of these activities is the pre-sessions that you will become, or you are already very familiar with. We have seen that through one of these activities, the pre-sessions, that the recommendations on digital rights from the third cycle to the fourth cycle, so for those countries, 20, 30 countries that have been reviewed up to now, have increased, especially when we had panelists that were addressing those rights. An example, a country in the third cycle received only one recommendation on digital rights and on abuses against children in the digital sphere. In the fourth cycle, UPR Info invited an NGO addressing child abuses in digital space, and the number of recommendations increased to 9 or 10, if I'm not mistaken. So as you can see, platforms like the pre-sessions or in general, the advocacy work that civil society organizations can conduct prior to the UPR can be very effective, because it reflects on the number of recommendations that then are made during the working group. And once again, why is that important? Is that it's important because if states commit, this means if states support those recommendations, they can be powerful advocacy tool that civil society organizations can use in their work at the national level to advocate for the protection, in this case, of vulnerable groups such as children. Another thematic that we see is increasing in UPR recommendations. It's all the thematics linked to environmental rights. As you know, it has been only recently recognized as a human right for a safe environment, but we had already in the third cycle many recommendations on environment, and they are increasing in the fourth cycle. Thanks is also, and actually thanks especially to the participation of NGOs working on these rights in the UPR process. And finally, one of the most, let's say, addressed thematics, it's all the issues linked with sexual orientation and gender identity. And so, for example, the decriminalization of same-sex marriage, or the measures to be taken to end discrimination against LGBTIQ plus persons. But what we see that the UPR is quite at the, let's say, on the front space of promoting human rights, is really giving the space and the voice for vulnerable groups to express their concerns and to bring up the violations that they suffer. As you know, the fact that NGOs can organize and submit reports in advance without having needing a specific status is extremely helpful to bring the concerns of those associations, of those NGOs at the grassroots level, to bring them to the attention at the international level during the UPR working groups. And then once that, if the recommendations are picked up, they can use those recommendations to advocate. And this is the case that we had, for example, in DRC, where NGOs working on disability rights have contributed in a relevant manner in promoting the rights for people with disabilities in the country, arriving not only to having a minister appointed on disability rights, but lately there is a draft law that has been recently approved that will provide access to many rights for the people with disabilities. So really, these are just a few examples to show how the UPR can bring a transformational change on the ground, but not only as by submitting reports, but especially by supporting that submission with advocacy work, with campaigns to raise awareness on the outcomes of the reports, of the research that has been done for the preparation of those reports. In this advocacy, it's important to conduct it on different levels. It can be conducted at the national level by raising awareness about the concerns, human rights concerns with the journalists, with the foreign embassies and the state under review, with members of the government when it's possible, with UN agencies that are on the ground. And of course, it's important to strategize for advocacy initiatives in order to raise awareness on those concerns at the international level. And that is to the diplomats that, for example, are in Geneva in the permanent missions and that will be present attending the UPR working group and therefore bringing those concerns on during the working group. Sorry, I went too fast. The other phase that I introduced at the beginning, so we have seen the preparation phase and the importance of submitting, conducting advocacy work before the review. Advocacy work that is extremely important also between the phase of the review and the adoption, because as you might recall, every state under review has approximately between 4 and 6 months of time to provide a final decision on which recommendations to support and to note. So in that time frame, the advocacy that civil society organizations can conduct at the national level can be extremely important to, let's say, have more recommendations supported and therefore more tools in the implementation phase at their disposal. But let's talk about the implementation phase. I know that it will not be, let's say, at the main part of your experience with the UPR model, but it's just really to show how the contribution of civil society organizations have led to a change, a positive change in the states under review. And this is the example that you see on the screen is it illustrates an example of a case study that UPR Info has prepared recently in a publication that came out in 2022, where we have identified the 17 cases, but we have further, but it's just that for our limits of time and resources, we were not able to go deeper for the other cases that we found. So we let's say analyzed more deeply only 17 cases where UPR recommendations contributed to a positive change on the ground. And this is the one, the case of Pakistan that passed an act in 2018 on the right of transgender people to be recognized according to their self-perceived gender identity. This was also thanks to recommendations that Pakistan received on this thematic. But what is also interesting is not only the fact that thanks to the participation of civil society organizations working on these rights, this issue was brought up in the UPR. What is even more interesting, or is still interesting, is the fact that advocates on these thematics were included in providing expertise for the draft of the law. So this wants to show the fact that the contribution of civil society organizations does not expire with the UPR review, but it continues once that this review has passed in the implementation phase, because civil society really is, let's say, a source of knowledge on the human rights thematics and on the context. And when there is a possibility to cooperate with national actors, usually this brings always to a positive impact of UPR recommendations. But this is just one of the examples, because, as I said, for example, we also have cases where civil society organizations has been able to implement, to support, not to implement, but to support the implementations of recommendations that were noted initially by the government. This is, for example, the case of Botswana, and of the recommendations received by Botswana on providing access to health for people, public access to health for people that were affected by HIV or AIDS. These recommendations were supported by Botswana, but not those recommendations that included in the text the access for public health services for people that were non-nationals. This means for migrants. Botswana accepted only the recommendations that concerned the, let's say, its own nationals. But thanks to the efforts of civil society organizations during the phase between the review and the adoption, and also during the implementation phase, in the end, Botswana extended free health care to also non-nationals. And this is really, once again, just an example on how really the recommendations, UPR recommendations, can be powerful tools when civil society engages and follows up on these recommendations, and of course, along with other national actors. Before leaving some time for questions and answers, for comments, I am happy to go more deeper in the aspects that we have seen, or in others that maybe I did not capture through discussion and exchange. I also wanted to comment a bit on further on the intervention of Julia on the selection of states and NGOs. So we have seen that you have, let's say, included in the choice of NGOs, as I said before, many of the key topics of the UPR, and let's say those that are increasing in the UPR recommendations. And also it's interesting, for example, the choice of the states. And you mentioned Slovakia, if I'm not mistaken, and the NHRI. Slovakia, for example, has been extremely active in supporting the ratification of the optional protocol of the Convention Against Torture. There's a draft law that at the moment, I don't know in which phase of review it is, but I remember up to last year, there was a draft law prepared to, let's say, integrate the provisions of the optional protocol of the Convention Against Torture. And the National Human Rights Institution, as you may know, has also in the mandate the possibility of establishing national preventive mechanism. And this means that they will be able then, the members and staff of the National Human Rights Institution of Slovakia, to conduct visits in prisons and assess, collect information and data to see if there are cases of torture or degrading treatment or inhuman treatment. So it was just to reinforce the fact that the choice of the countries and the actors, I think it's well played. So congratulations for that. And really happy now to reply to any question or request.
Thank you, Nicoletta. I think now we can either ask the attendees to put something in the chat if they want to intervene, or maybe they can raise their hands. I hope it is possible, and if they do that, I'll give them the floor, so they will magically appear as the panelists. So I'm checking the list of attendees here. So find any way to to signal your willingness to participate in the discussion. I have, if you don't mind, I ask a little things to Nicoletta. Thank you, first of all, for the presentation, which was very, very comprehensive and very clear as usual. You're so good in explaining how all the subtleties of the UPR mechanism and its implications and so on. If I may, can I ask you if you can expand a little bit on the practice that you actually started? UPR Info started this pre-session initiative, no? So that it's before the working group start working on the state under review. There is this sort of question and answer, session in which civil society actors can bring to the attention of any state involved in the discussion issues, relevant issues, last minute situations that may orient the discussion and eventually the recommendations during the working group. Did you evaluate eventually the input, the impact of this practice? What kind of lessons did you draw from this, from the experience of this in the last years of having these pre-sessions? Is it something that is really, let's say, adding a value to the whole process? Is it maybe a way of getting civil society involved better in this state-led procedure, and to which extent we can push further in that direction? Is it something that states start to be concerned about, perhaps? Thank you.
Yes, it's a good question, because I was talking with my colleague just before, and she also gave me some insights that can be relevant to your question. So just to introduce the pre-sessions were started in 2012, and they were really, let's say, the result of an assessment that my previous colleagues did on the fact that to expand the possibilities for civil society organizations to participate in the mechanism, beyond submitting on the reports, beyond the possibility of conducting advocacy at the national level. But UPR also thought it was important to provide a platform at the international level, this means in Geneva, where civil society organizations and members, so human rights defenders, and national human rights institutions in the last 4 years come to Geneva and present the human rights challenges and priorities directly to the diplomats representing the UN member states that will then make recommendations in the review of their country. So let's say, it's an initiative that is beneficial for civil society organizations, because on one side they have the space to talk with the representative of states, and as you know, there is not this possibility during the UPR working group because civil society cannot take the floor during the review of their country. So we organize these events 1 or 2 months before the UPR working group, so the states can talk with the diplomats of the other UN member states and provide first-hand information. If you ask why is this necessary, yes, because the reports that are submitted by civil society organizations are submitted 6 months before the UPR of a country. So in 6 months, we have seen that situation can change a lot. It can be a pandemic, it can be the deterioration of a political situation, it could be let's say an outbreak of violence against peaceful assembly. So it is important to provide updated first-hand information through the states before the review. But on the other side, it's actually an initiative that is also beneficial for the states that are making recommendations, because they have, let's say, a privileged channel to have first-hand information from civil society of those countries for which they will need to make recommendations. So also for them, we know that thanks to their feedback that they gave to UPR Info, that it's a very important, let's say, step of their participation in the UPR process. And of course, like given to the constraints of time and resources, the panels that we have for each state under review cannot be larger than, we cannot have more than 5 or 6 panelists each time. But already it's, let's say, key information that is shared, because UPR Infos try to select organizations that work with other coalitions so that they can speak on behalf of a broader range of actors at the national level. And we also try to ensure a diversified thematic panel so that we have, let's say, the main human rights challenges reflected in the panel. Of course, it's impossible to reflect all because, as I said, the time and the resources are limited. But regarding the impact of the pre-sessions in the actual recommendations that are formulated during the working group, we have been assessing this impact, let's say, on a regular basis, and we see that there is a high caption of the thematics that are addressed in the pre-sessions are also addressed in the UPR working group with a very high percentage, almost more than 80%. What we are currently assessing, and this takes a bit of more time because there's a lot of data to analyze, is to go deeper from the 3rd cycle and the 4th cycles to see more precisely if the language and the, let's say, text of the recommendations made by the civil society during the pre-sessions is how, let's say, if it's taken in all or partially, or it's just a thematic that is taken up by the states. As I made the example before, what happens is that sometimes civil society organizations make very specific recommendations, And so the diplomats and the states, the recommending states, take that thematic, but they would formulate it in a more general way. However, we see an increase of, let's say, specific recommendations, but there's still a large scope for improvement. This means that states should still make efforts to make more specific recommendations as the ones that civil society formulates in the reports or in the advocacy actions and their advocacy efforts. However, as I said before, there is a large percentage of the thematics addressed in the pre-sessions that we find also during the working group. So we can say it has a big impact on the UPR recommendations.
From the participants. Okay, Julia.
Yes, I just wanted to kind of shed light onto what Nicoletta said and kind of underline that in the UPR simulation, in case there's any future or potential participants attending the seminar, or well, in the following videos that we're gonna put on YouTube, for instance, that this is mirrored in our simulations. We have the first day of the Padova Model UPR entirely dedicated to civil society, and both NHRIs and INGOs can present the reports, and then we have the option for participants to create alliances between themselves within civil society, and then to lobby with states. And in past cycles, I mean, in past models, we have seen what Nicoletta said in our small reality, as in some of the issues that were raised by civil society organizations within the model being mirrored in the reports and in the working group sessions. So I think that in this sense, the model does reflect this very important, very significant role that civil society has within the UPR itself.
The way the reviewing states are grabbing and taking up the suggestions coming from the NGOs, the civil society organizations during the pre-session segment of our exercise. So how they take and reproduce the suggestions received by the NGOs. This is also a criteria that we can take into account in assessing the performance of the groups, of the teams. So in a sense, we are valuing this part of the simulation quite significantly. I wanted to ask Nicoletta another thing. I mean, impressions from her side, because the fourth cycle started in 2022. Now it's going to continue. It started in a very peculiar year, I would say, for the global society, the international society, the war in Ukraine, the aftermath of the COVID crisis, and so on. So I wanted to ask, since you were in Geneva, maybe assisted to some moments in of the working group, to which extent this global crisis had been echoed in the work of of course, the Human Rights Council, but also the working group, the UPR working group. Because sometimes the impression is that in this UPR working group works like a sort of a bullet in which, a bubble in which, the external facts are sort of taken at distance, because otherwise the whole debate about the implementation of the UPR recommendations of a given country are sort of hijacked by the the current issues that the international community is discussing at the moment. But nevertheless, I mean, would make sense that the general mood in which we are living influences or has an impact in any case in this discussion. So how this interplay between you know, current issues and dramatic situations that the international community is facing and the sort of technical, very specific focus that we want to maintain on the situation in single countries that characterizes the UPR, how this interplay has been played in 2022 and is going to be played in 2023.
The thing is that the UPR, even if it looks like a mechanism that, let's say, is quite slow on one side, because the review of a country happens every 4.5 years, more or less. However, for example, during and after the pandemic, we've seen that the UPR has the capacity of adapting and of capturing the concerns that are widespread in the society. So, for example, we had not only statements of states presenting how they were coping with the COVID emergency, then how they were ensuring or restricting rights in some cases during the pandemic, but also civil society organizations reflecting these global challenges in the reports and their advocacy efforts. So we see that there are recommendations, for example, mentioning specifically to the COVID restrictions, the restrictions took during the pandemic. So on one side, it's thanks especially to the contribution that civil society do, that the UPR can reflect the global trends, even in a mechanism that has very, let's say, it's very procedural. There are very strict rules for some aspects, and it's not a mechanism that you would use for an urgent situation. You cannot, the UPR cannot address an urgent situation because the procedures and the time between the procedures is it's quite long from one step to another. So it's not the best mechanism from that, but for a reflection on the global trends, I think actually its nature can give some very interesting perspective of how these global trends have entered in the UPR. Regarding, for example, conflicts and crisis situations, of course, those that are existing for a longer time are brought up in the UPR as well. What I wanted also to add is that the UPR has this possibility of, thanks to the fact that under review, there are the conventions, the treaties, the commitments, the human rights obligations that the state has undertaken, but it does not have a narrow scope of action, because it's not like a committee that comes up from a treaty body, that, for example, the Committee Against Torture, that can analyze the cases of torture or degrading treatment in a country, or, for example, the Committee for the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, that has, anyways, a thematic that is well defined. Thanks to the nature of the UPR, it's all the obligations that the state has undertaken up to that moment. So if a state has ratified the Convention Against Torture, Against Elimination, Discrimination Against Women, or any other type of treaty or covenant, those obligations can be addressed in the UPR. And further to that, what is also something quite interesting of the UPR is that as the, let's say, basis of the UPR is enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is principles, it gives also a marge, a wide marge to address also new emerging human rights challenges. That's why in the UPR we have been seeing recommendations addressing environmental rights before that was considered a human right. And this is the same, for example, now with the digital space and digital rights. So it's like it's a venue where emerging rights can start to take the space. So emerging rights or emerging challenges can be addressed in the UPR and then further developed by other mechanisms or other bodies as the Human Rights Council that then would focus, make, let's say, more analytical assessment on the priorities on specific themes or thematics.
Yeah, thank you. No, very much. Thank you for this this response. I asked that question because sometimes also in our exercise there is this reluctance from some teams not to think and speak outside the box, and raise issues that are not stuckly in the tracks. Of course, we don't want to challenge the procedures, the sort of nature of the UPR, which is not a forum for big debates about new issues and so on. It's very much focused on the implementation, the standards, and so on and so forth. However, there might be some room also for touching upon some new issues or issues that the contemporary situations are raising that can be reflected somehow, decoded in the discussion concerning the UPR. I'm looking at the list of attendees, if they have any questions. I don't know, Sophia, if you can help me. Is there any other ways that attendees can ask questions?
Yeah, like it's either the chat or the raise their hands and.
Or raise hand at the bottom. Yeah.
Yeah, and then they can ask me to unmute them.
Yeah.
Okay.
But, okay. Go, Sophia.
Yes. Okay.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. I have a more general question than is not referred to what Nicoletta said until now. It's more about the UPR. What if I ask it now or wait? I don't know. Should I? Okay. I was wondering, because I'm going to apply for OSCE simulation, which is going to happen 2 weeks before the UPR. Will I be able to participate in UPR as well? Or like the amount of work to prepare the UPR is a lot. It takes, how much time does it take? Almost, I don't know. Was it clear? Okay. Okay, thanks.
I don't know, maybe Julia or some other members of the Secretariat can respond, but those who have already had this experience of participating in the UPR model, the model UPR last year or 2 years ago. I don't know if you have suggestions for Filippo, any advice?
Yes, honestly, I think that it depends on which team you apply for, whether it's a state or an NHRI. I was in an NHRI team, or NHRI or NGO, so civil society, which are 2 people's teams. So they're smaller teams, and generally the reports are shorter the reports that you have to write, for instance, in the weeks leading to the simulation. And of course, you're not going to be on your own, you're going to have teammates. So I think that if you are able to coordinate well with teammates, it should be doable. But I don't know whether some of my colleagues from states can have more insight on what it looks like to be part of a 5-people team. And what it looks like with the workload, because I know that for states, there's more to write and kind of more to research.
As far as I remember, the OSCE simulation doesn't require participants to do much in advance. So it's more the work takes place basically during the few days of the actual simulation, as far as I remember. But I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's like that. It's just that from like on the week from the 5th to the 10th, something like that. I won't be here. I mean, I will be in Germany if they will choose me. So I was wondering the amount of work, like if I will be able in almost 1 week and a half to prepare, or what I have to prepare for the UPR, on which I'm very interested to participate.
I think the work for the UPR starts early in October.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. Okay.
So assignments start to be given in October, and then there are some deadlines, a couple of deadlines, as far as I remember, before the dates of the simulation. The dates of the simulation are from 20
to the 24th. Yeah.
The 20th to the 24th of November. Okay. So, well, I don't know.
So if they will start in October, it's just about my organization.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
But I don't know if Julia or Sophia are more precise than me in the timing, let's say, of the time frame of the work.
Yes, Sophia can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that the deadline for applications from Italian universities is the first week of October, and then we're going to have the info sessions, and during the info sessions, within the first 2, we're already going to explain the tasks, so report writing and mainly alliance building when it comes to civil society organizations and lobbying for states and advanced questions, if I'm not mistaken. And I think that, like you've said, Filippo, I think it's a matter of organization, it's doable, and normally deadlines for reports are at the beginning of November, so I don't think that they will overlap with the 2 weeks that you're talking about, because we keep the weeks just before the simulation to give time for alliance building and to kind of prepare the presentations and prepare like a plan for the actual simulation. So we leave the entire month of October, and well, November as well, because the simulation is towards the end, for research and preparation. So I think you're gonna have enough time to do it all, especially because it's a team effort again. So you're not gonna be on your own carrying the workload.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks.
Questions or comments? I think we can thank again Nicoletta, wish her a good, safe trip to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and hope that she will maybe be available to help us again for the training, and also maybe for some involvement in the simulation in November. Okay, and thanks a lot for spreading the word about this initiative. I know that you talk about our you've been talking about our initiative also in other visits that you made You also told me that our manual was translated into French in some
Yes.
African country.
Exactly. So it's not ready yet. We are proofreading the French translation, but we managed to find a partner with whom we work to translate the handbook. So as soon as we have the publication, we will first launching it. We will share it for you to be sure that all the, let's say, the right placement of things is there. And also I wanted to share the fact that we had let's say we supported the organization of the UPR model in Togo and with the University of Lomé, which opened the call for application for all the university in the country. It's been very much participated, and it was, let's say, an activity that was conducted by a NGO with whom we work in the country, as well as the National Human Rights Institution in collaboration with the university. And it has been, let's say, well participated, and also all the participants were enthusiastic of having the UPR model like developed. So it was a very nice initiative, and I think, I don't know if I sent links of the coverage that they did, but if not, I will send you very soon the links.
Okay, thanks a lot. So we are going to revise our our manual now. So in case we can liaise with them to have a translation also of the new edition of the handbook. Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to those who participated. I hope you can help again doing a little more of advertisement on the occasion of the next meetings that we have in this series. The next one will be the 22nd of June, so we have a few weeks to get organized. Even though I know that this is a month quite busy for many students with the exams. Graduations and so on, but let's try to use this series for getting in touch with more people interested in participating in our simulation. Thanks a lot, Nicoletta. Have a good night.
Thank you. Bye bye. Good luck, everyone. Bye bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia, for
Bye, thanks. Bye.
Thank you very much to everyone. Bye-bye. Have a nice night.